Okay, we have part three, and I'm going to go over four more of the ethical theories. Here are two more. This first one is called the common good, and here the welfare of individuals is inextricably bound to the good of the community. And so it's more of a not necessarily the attempt to measure, but but by pursuing my private goals, I recognize the community as much as myself. So, as your book describes it, um, the common good I think of as certain general conditions that are appropriate sense equally to everyone's advantage. This approach respects and encourages individuals' freedom to pursue private goals, but asks that we recognize and advance the goals that we share in common. There's some ambiguities. What outcomes are for our individual versus common goods? When may individual freedoms be exercised at the expense of others, and so forth. We also have virtue. Virtue is the idea that we follow the middle path. Now, this is an idea in following the mean between two vices. So, for example, courage is a moral virtue between the vices of cowardice and rashness. Um, Modesty falls between the vices of arrogance and low self esteem. So you choose to follow the middle path. And the idea here is those who have virtuous traits will act in a virtuous manner. If you are a courageous person, you will do courageous things. If you're a modest person, you will do modest things. Critics argue, though, that virtue ethics fails to address issues relevant to the quest for right and wrong. There's a lack of specific behavioral guidelines, leaves common ethical dilemmas as to whether to recycle, whether to contribute to habitat preservation open to interpretation, and seemingly virtuous people might engage in questionable behavior. So there may not necessarily be the connection between the virtuous person and the virtuous behavior. And we have two more. We have the idea of rights. And here, the overriding question is, does the action respect the moral rights of everyone? And so engaging in the behavior, it's the morals. Do we engage in the behavior based on the moral duty or versus the action's repercussions? And our moral duties are the things that should justify our behavior, and thus the ends do not necessarily justify the means. As a matter of fact, a philosopher named Immanuel Kant said, according to his principle of ends, one should never treat humanity as a means to an end, but always as an end in and of itself. Again, the means do not justify the ends. And he further went on to talk about a categorical imperative that states that we should only choose those actions that we would put forth as the universal law of nature. If we do not want everyone to build go-kart tracks in residential areas, we should not choose that behavior for ourselves. If we would want everyone to recycle and ride their bicycle to class or work rather than driving, we should do so as well. Oh, interesting. So do not ask others to do things that you would not do so yourself. And we have another one called justice. And here is the action fair and just? Does the action treat everyone equally? Does it aligns with anti-discrimination and comparable worth movement? So is everyone treated fairly as a result of the action that is done? And your book uses an example of justice for animals and wildlife is central to the ethical theory of people for the ethical treatment of animals. So I'm treating my let's say for experiments. I am experiments on medicine for animals. If the action is ethical, if it treats the animals as fairly as the humans are being treated. Now here's a couple of pictures from your book. They highlight moral dilemmas. Here is one about chickens, some alive and some dead on the way to market. Is our treatment of animals moral according to some of these different criteria? And the same thing can be said about the shark here. Is it moral to buy bottled baby sharks? Is it moral for the person to do that? Obviously, it probably falls against the ethical idea of justice in the very least. It's certainly not fair to the shark to be bottled up like that. Okay, this ends our third section of this chapter.